Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today's video explores an alternate version of events and characters in a reimagined storyline. This presentation is structured and adopted into an audiobook style format with narration and visuals to enhance the experience. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the story.
Jamir shifted slightly. The chair creaked. He rolled his shoulders, he blinked, and he looked at Danya. She looked at him and grinned. He grinned back. They both turned to look at the maester as he spoke. Aegon III came to the throne, after a period of great chaos. The dance of the dragons was not a dance so much as a bloodbath. Brother fought brother and father fought son as the greatest beasts to ever grace this world fought one another in the sky. Many people lost their homes and their livelihoods and loved ones to the whims of a treacherous vassal of the Targaryens. The rightful succession was denied and the world burned for it. Yachting had heard Ned speak about the dance of dragons with the prince, and as such he knew something of why it had happened, but still he asked, why were there so many people who were opposed to Princess Rhaenyra becoming queen? After all, King Viserys had declared her his heir, and as king his word was law. Nobody should have opposed that, even if he had a son. Master Kennett nodded. You are right, of course, Master Yame. But you see, there were many people who thought that a woman could not inherit the throne, that she should not inherit the throne. For they thought that the Great Council of 101 at Harrenhal had sorted that matter for them. When the Lords of the Realm chose Viserys over his cousin Rhaenys, they forgot to realize that Viserys was not his grandfather, and whereas the old king had more diplomacy in him than others might have done, Viserys was always very firm when it suited him. And so they fought a war because some of the lords ignored their king's wishes. Dany asked, sounding deeply disturbed, That's not right whatsoever. Maester Kennett nodded again. Indeed not, Princess. The Maester paused. Unlike Pycelle, he was not an old man. He was young. Yami imagined him to be around 30, name days old. Just like Papa, he had short brown hair and a slight beard as well, and dark brown eyes. Eyes that crinkled when he laughed or smiled. He was a nice man. After the death of Queen Rhaenyra and the victory of her brother Aegon, there was a brief period where all seemed lost. But the supporters of Queen Rhaenyra rallied to her son Aegon the Younger, even though he was a prisoner of his uncle. They fought on, and as the dragons were descending into nothingness, Aegon II died. His nephew married his daughter Rhaenyra as a means of healing the divide, but the divide remained. Jaime had heard this from Ned as well, and so it was with some confidence that he said, there were supporters of both Aegon II and Rhaenyra on the small council, on the Regency Council, and at court during Aegon III's minority. They fought and bickered, and there were several times where the young king found his own life in grave danger. Just so, Master Kennett said, smiling. Jaime felt himself flush with pride. Lord Peake was the main person who wished for more than was his due. He wanted his daughter married to the king, and so he did all he could to drive a wedge between the king and his young queen. He spread rumors, he did all sorts of other things. It is believed that he was responsible for her death. It was his brother who served on the king's guard when she fell. Please tell me that he was punished, Dany asked, her voice filled with anger. He was, but not in the way that most traitors would be. He was dismissed from his post and exiled to Starpike, and then slowly but surely saw his influence and the influence of his family stripped to the bone. For 60 years after his fall from power, no Peake ever set foot in King's Landing. But Peake was not the only one who played the game during the Regency. Lord Manderley played as did his brother, Maester Monken, who was the Grand Maester, was the greatest traitor of them all. You see, he did much to break the power of the crown, placing his family and his friends in positions of power and looking the other way when they committed abuses of power in the name of the crown. Monken was the one who sent the King's Guard to try and arrest Larry Roger de Boif of the king's brother, the future Viserys II, and he was the one who ordered the inquest into the Pale Heir. As such, when Monken died, it is said that King Aegon breathed a great sigh of relief. Kennett said, What was Aegon like when this all happened? Jaime asked. He could not imagine what the young king must have gone through or what he might have felt being king, but having no power whatsoever to do anything but sign and agree to the decisions of adults who did not know anything but their own desire for power. He would hate that. He was a shy and retiring young man. According to the memoirs of Maester Loren, He preferred the company of his friend Gaiman, and when Gaiman died, he preferred the company of his true brother Viserys. He did not like anyone touching him, even in a friendly embrace. And he did not cry. He never cried, even when his wife died. When the regency ended, he is said to have done the one thing that reminded people of his father, the illustrious Prince Daemon. He strode into the council chamber fully armored, accompanied by the king's guard and his brother, and grabbed Lord Rowan by the scruff of the neck and threw him to the floor and sat in the king's chair. Rightly so, Dane said with great fervor. Indeed, Master Kennett said. King Aegon spent the rest of his reign trying to fix the mistakes made by the regents and his own family. He and his brother brought new methods of taxation to the realm. They built roads and developed houses for the poor. They did much, but they were hampered by some who wished for the power of the dragons to never reach great heights. Why? Dany asked, her brows furrowed. Dany thought she looked pretty. Well, she always looked pretty, but especially so now. Maester Kennett took a deep breath. Because there are always those lords and nobles who wish for their power to be protected, who fail to realize that the best way for the people to progress and be kept safe is for the crown to have more power. If left to their own devices, the nobles will do all they can to keep the people on their knees, and that is not good for anyone. King Aegon and Prince Viserys realized this, and they tried to change it. But there were times when they faced the most stringent opposition, particularly when people started claiming to be King Aegon's uncle, Prince Daeron. Returned from the dead. Jaime gasped. People actually did that. Why? Please tell me they didn't get any support. Master Kennett sighed. They got support, and they did it because they felt they could. Nobody had found his body at the Tumbleton, and so they felt that this was the best opportunity they would get to ensure proper recognition for their efforts. They were all false, of course, but they caused some great panic for the king and for his family, especially Princess Rhaena. His sister. But I thought she was betrothed to the king's older brother Lucerys before his death, Dany asked. She was princess, and though none can ever truly say what their feelings were for one another, it is noted by many of the courtiers at King Visir's court that Princess Rhaena and Prince Daeron cared for one another greatly. It is possible that this might simply have been affection between cousins, but there are those who think it otherwise. Regardless, these impostors came and caused great trouble for the king and his brother. And the only peace it is said the king got was when he married his second wife, Queen Daenerys. For it is said she was the only person who did not treat him as the king, but as her husband and her friend. And for a boy who had grown up without any friends, that meant more than anything else. Master Kennett said. They had 5 children, didn't they? Jaime asked. He always got somewhat confused with the naming of the Targaryen children. They reused a lot of names, but so too did the Lannisters. They did. And they got over the king's fear of being touched through love and through hard work, the maester replied. There was a brief pause, and then Dany asked, what happened to King Aegon's sisters? Baela and Rhaena, what did they do once the dance finished? Princess Baela was married to her cousin, Lord Aelin Velaryon. The marriage is said to have been a happy one, and they had a great many children. She was greatly scarred by her ordeal fighting in the dance, but she retained a hardy character, and often served as a representative for her brother on diplomatic missions to the free cities and elsewhere in Essos. It was Princess Baela who convinced her brother not to invade Dorne, stating that the cost of the war would far exceed the potential benefit. Maester Kennett said. He took a breath, then continued. As for Princess Rhaena, the Regency Council had agreed beforehand that as a measure of peace she should be married into the family that had started the war. You're not serious? They forced her to marry the Hightowers. Jaime and Dany exclaimed at the same time. Yes, she had married Ser Corwyn Corbray during the Regency, for they were friends and it was a way to protect her brother. But then Ser Corwyn died fighting against rebels in the Riverlands, and so she was single once more. She had had no children by Ser Corwyn, and so the Regency thought it best to wed her to the Hightowers to prevent another war. Ser Corwyn was not of the direct line, but he was young and handsome and was smart, and so they were married. Maester Kennett replied. What was their marriage like, Dany asked. It was cordial. That is all the records say of it. Princess Rhaena took her dragon mourning with her to Old Town, but it died under strange circumstances. She had 6 daughters by her husband, and nothing more is known about her. It is as if she disappeared off of the pages of history, Maester Kennett said. That doesn't seem fair, Dany said. She was a person too. She had concerns, hopes, dreams, loves, and hates. Why was she written off of the pages of history and her sister was not? Princess Rhaena did enough to protect the family during the dance. Did she not? She convinced the Vale to keep fighting even when it was breaking and the clans were hurting them. She convinced the Lord of Winterfell to allow Corlys Velaryon to be pardoned and restored to his position. Why then was she ignored? There was real passion in Dane's voice, and Jaime found himself agreeing with her. Master Kenneth had a strange look on his face. It was a mixture of amusement and something else. An emotion that Jaime could not name, but no doubt Ned could. Ned could always name the emotions people tried to hide. Eventually, Master Kenneth spoke. I agree, Princess. She should not have been ignored. And perhaps when you are older, you will do more to shine a light on her and ensure more people come to know of her. He paused and then said, But for now, our lesson is over. You may return to your chambers now. They both stood up and thanked the Master before turning and leaving the room. Jaime looked at Dante and suddenly found that he didn't want her to go just yet. So he asked, What do you want to do? Let's go to the rookery, Dane said, smiling. Jaime agreed, and so they started walking that way. Sergais of the King's Guard accompanied them. As they walked, Jaime found himself thinking about King Aegon and the sort of life the king must have had. It sounded like a burden, a huge burden to shoulder from such a young age. He was not sure he would ever be able to handle that. He was not sure he would be a good Lord of the Rock, let alone a good king. He sighed and asked Dachshund, Do you ever what life would be like as a normal girl? Dany stopped near a door and said, I am a normal girl. Jaime giggled. I mean, to me you are, but to someone else you might not be. You are a princess, after all. Dany didn't laugh like he thought she would. Instead, she sighed. I know, but I am normal. It's not like I've got some sort of magic power. All I can do is say my name to get things, but then I guess that is a magic power, especially here. Especially here, Jaime agreed, grinning. Dany giggled, then stopped. But no, I've never wondered what it would be like not to be a princess. How could I, when I do not know what such a life would be like? I've never met anyone who was not from a noble family. Jaime thought about it for a moment, and then realized that neither had he. An idea formed in his head, one that might well get him into a lot of trouble later. Do I want to... What? Dany asked. Do you want to meet normal people? Jaime replied. Dany pursed her lips, her brow raised. After what seemed like forever, she said, Yes. Jackson grinned and grabbed her hand and said, Come on, let's go then. And before Dainty or Sergei could say anything else, he started walking the other way. Dainty's hand was warm in his, and they walked through the Red Keep out into the gardens, and then they made a slow descent down the hill. For some reason, nobody stopped them, and usually Yancey would find that unusual, but right now he was more interested in what he wanted to see, what he wanted Dainty to see. They walked down the hill, and then they came to the foot of it, where there were shacks and huts, and people stared at them. Jackson stopped then, feeling slightly nervous. What do we do now? Dany whispered. Princess, perhaps we had best go back. Sir Giles suggested. Jaime turned and saw his hand moving to his sword. No, let's keep going. Come on, Dany, you wanted to see the people. Well, here we are, Jaime said, and he pulled Dany along with him down the street. As they walked, Jaime saw more people stare at them. He saw children no older than them sitting in their own poo. He saw dogs running around, and nobody came to speak to them. They all just stared at them. He felt something shiver inside him. Perhaps this had not been the best idea. Perhaps he should have suggested something else. He looked at Dany and saw that there was something resembling fear on her face. He stopped, and she stopped. Sir Giles moved to stand in front of them. A man walked forward. He threw himself to the floor in front of them and said, Princess, you have come just as we knew you would. We love you, Princess. Another man came forward, this time with a baby in his arms. Please, Princess, he's been screaming all night, and he's hot. Can you please cure him? Jaime wanted to ask how Dany was supposed to cure the baby. She was not a maester, but the babe was thrust before Dany, and she hesitantly touched the baby's forehead and whispered something that sounded like the mother's prayer. The man took the baby back and touched its forehead. He's cooler now, thank you, Princess. As soon as word got around at what Dany had done, more people came to present themselves or their family members for cures. Dany touched many foreheads and many hands, and Jack and I did as well, which he thought was strange. He'd heard about this sort of thing, Ned had read about it all the time, but now he was witnessing it. It was very surreal. Was this actually happening? Was Dany actually curing these people? Or was it something else? It was all very strange. Eventually, though, Sir Giles stepped in and said very loudly, The princess and Master Dany must return to the Red Keep. Thank you. And as one where before people had merely stared at them, as they turned and made their way back to the Red Keep, people bowed their heads and threw themselves to the floor. It was very strange. The minute they got back to the Red Keep and to the hallway, Dini turned to him and with a big smile said, "Thank you." Jaime looked at her confused. "For what?" "For showing me I don't need to be afraid," Dany replied. Jaime was not sure he understood why she would be afraid, but then Dany kissed his cheek and he blushed. "Well, you're welcome," he said softly. Dany smiled and then turned and walked to her rooms. Jaime was left standing there, not entirely sure about what he'd witnessed or what had just happened, but thinking he would do whatever he could to make Dany smile again. He walked back to his own rooms. All the while, the images of the people throwing themselves to the ground and bowing before Dany and him, flowed through his mind. A large part of him was disconcerted by it. A smaller part, a part he was not even sure was real, liked it. The king has decided that he wishes to travel his realm, and as such has declared that the entire court is to come with him. We shall be coming to the Westerlands and the Rock in roughly a moon's time. I know this is short notice, my love, but please do have as much prepared as you can in that time. I will see what else I can do from my end. Love, Tywin... Joanna put the letter down. That was the third time she had read it, and still her heart hammered a little. The king was coming to the Rock alongside the court, and Tywin was coming home. She was excited. That meant her husband and her sons, for yes, she did consider Eddard a son, were coming home as well. It also meant that they might be able to figure something out with the king for Cersei or for Jaime. She glanced at the letter again, and then looked up at Maester Crelan and Ser Cavan and said, "The king and the royal court are coming to Casterly Rock. They will be here in a moon's turn. This is part of the king's progress around the realm. As such, it has fallen to us to prepare for the visit." She took a breath and allowed both men to digest this information, and then she continued. "Maester Crelan, do we have enough food to last through for the next 3 moons? You remember what happened the last time the court was here, I am sure. The court had come 9 years ago, and they had very nearly eaten everything that the Rock had to offer." Master Casterly nodded. "I do, my lady." The master paused for a moment and pulled out a scroll from one of his robes. Joanna found herself wondering, not for the first time, what exactly Casterly kept in his sleeves. Casterly looked at the scroll and then said, "We have enough food for the next year, my lady. But should the royal court do as they did the last time they were here, they might well eat through half a year's worth of supplies." Joanna tried to keep from shuddering. The thought of that much food disappearing in such a short time was not a pleasant thought. Knowing His Majesty, the court will likely be here for around 2 weeks. Enough time for a tourney and some other diplomatic discussion and nothing more. Unlike the last time where the kingdoms were run from here. That had been a very interesting experience. The king had for some reason decided to rule from the Rock and had spent 4 moons here, digging through taxation, hearing petitions, and many other things. Eventually he had left, and Joanna had breathed a sigh of relief. "Do you wish for me to send word to the Cracals and the Braxes and ask them for more of their grain supply? After all, they are some of the most productive areas." Casterly asked. "No, do not do that just yet. We have enough food and water and alcohol for a year, as you have said. I do not wish to convey an impression that we need to borrow from our vassals." Joanna said, "Especially not after Serit's revelations the previous year. I think we shall just need to be cautious about what food we have now before the court comes." She paused, thinking. She knew that Eris was trying to cut down on how much he drank, and that Roxlier was starting to show. He wondered why they were both coming and wondered if that meant they had patched things up. For Roxlier, she hoped so. "I think we shall need to ensure the royal suites are fully prepared and stocked with books and the appropriate warming conditions." Joanna knew that both Eris and Roxlier liked their rooms to be very hot. As for the prince and princess's rooms, I think we should keep them at a medium temperature and ensure there are plenty of books in the prince's room. Joanna knew from Tywin and Eddard's letters that the prince loved reading. Cleland nodded. "And where should the prince and princesses be based, my lady?" "The royal suites only have 3 rooms, and I do not think it would be appropriate to keep the princesses away from their parents." Joanna agreed. Princess Shaina was a young lady of 4 and 10, but her sister Princess Daenerys was merely a child of 10 named Days. It would be a difficult one. She did not think that the princesses would want to share rooms with one another. She certainly hadn't want to at that age. She thought for a moment, and then said, "Extend the royal suite. Ensure that Lan's room is added to it as well as Gerald's room. That would make sense, and both rooms were big and grand enough to be part of the royal suite. Very well, my lady, Creelan said, making a note of this on some paper he had pulled from somewhere. Joanna really did wonder where he got all of his tools from, and how he managed to fit them in his robes. There was a brief pause, and then he asked, "And what about the other courtiers? Villian, Staunton, Chelstead? They will all want suitable rooms near the royal suite. Pixel as well," Kevin said, and Joanna saw Creelan grimace slightly, and she hid a smile. Creelan did not like his cousin, not one bit, which was a good thing. She did not trust Pixel either. "I think we should keep them in the custom suites. They are near enough to the royal suite that the council members would not feel insulted, but they are not near enough to the royal suite to diminish the fact that the royal family is staying at the residence of the Hand of the King," Joanna said firmly. Crozier nodded and Kevin asked, "What about the carriages and the horses?" "We have enough space for the carriages, but I am not sure whether the horses would all want to stay within the confines of the rock itself." A perfectly valid point, especially considering just how dark it could get within the rock. Joanna thought for a moment and then said, "Prepare the stables in Lannisport. It is not too far a distance for the transport to take them from the city to the rock should they wish it." Kevin nodded and there was silence again. Joanna ran through the list in her mind. What else might be needed? Food and supplies, sorted. Rooms appropriate for their guests, sorted. Entertainment? The singers who were here the last time the court came. Who were they? There had been one singer who had been very good, who had managed to get Tywin to smile and dance with her. If she could, she would bring that singer back. One was called Tom of the Seven Strings, Kevin said. Joanna was not surprised, he remembered. Kevin's memory had always been good. Then there was Jane of the Streams, and finally Garrett of the Green. Joanna nodded. "Send men to find them and bring them invitations for this event. They are the best of the singers that have come through the rock in recent years, and the royal court deserves only the best." Kevin made a note of that. Joanna checked entertainment off her list, and then finally came to the matter that would be most pressing. "How are things looking since Sirid and his lot were taken off this world?" "Much better than they had been before, my lady," Kevin said. "The merchants are feeling far more comfortable walking the streets and traveling from place to place. Even Baneford has ventured out from his castle." Joanna nodded. "Good, I want the patrols to continue, and for it to be doubled as the royal visit draws nearer. We shall not have bandits making things difficult." Kevin nodded, and Joanna could not think of anything more to say. So she said, "Kevin, you may go. Master Creelan, if you wait here for a moment, I shall write out my response to Tywin." Kevin bowed and then straightened and walked out. Joanna took up a quill and wrote out her response. "My love, received your letter. Have made arrangements accordingly. Look forward to seeing you all. Give my love to Jaime and Eddard. Love, Joanna." It was a simple letter, but she had long ago learned that Tywin preferred to convey his emotions in person, and so she would save just how grateful she was. He was coming home when she actually saw him. She folded the letter and placed it inside cover, and then affixed the Lannister lion seal to the back, before handing it to Creelan, who nodded and walked out. Joanna watched the maester go and then waited. Shortly after he left, Jaina and her husband Saradin walked into the room. "Sit," Joanna said pleasantly. She did not like Aenon, but she did like Jaina, and therefore she would be polite. "Thank you for seeing us," Ganna said, sincerity in her voice. Joanna felt bad for her good sister. Ganna had not asked to be married to a fool, and for some reason, Tywin had refused to grant the relevant papers for the annulment, and so they suffered through it. Joanna nodded. Allowing the silence to settle again, she needed to think of a way to say this properly, without giving in to the anger that always threatened to lap at her when she thought of what had happened, of what Aemon had done. It took her a little more time, and then she opened her mouth, and the words came. How she did not know. I have thought long and hard about what happened, as has Tywin, and we have reached a decision. Yenna leaned forward, as did Aemon, though there was something predatory in Aemon's eyes that she had never seen before. This is the last time we shall pardon such a grave offense. You are a son as well as a husband and a father, Aemon. Therefore it makes sense that you would try and ensure your father was well in his old age. However, know this. Make another attempt to convey information to Walder Frey, and you will be killed. Aemon swallowed. Joanna could see the bob of his throat, and had to hide her disgust behind her hands. I do, Aemon stuttered out. The man was not brave, he was not bold. He wasn't even a weasel. He was just a fool. A naive little fool. Very well, Joanna said, nodding to Janna, who exhaled a breath that she probably didn't even know she'd been holding. She decided that since she had them both here, she might as well find out what she wanted to know. So, what did your father say exactly? Or was it Lothar Frey who conveyed the messages? She saw the surprise on Emond's face and laughed at it. With how closely watched the twins was, Joanna seriously wondered how Emond thought his father had gotten this information out. Walder Frey thought he was clever. He was the weak link that would break down the conspiracy. Emond took a breath. It came out sounding like a rattle. He wrote to say that he is disappointed. He thought that I would play a much greater role in ensuring that he was seen as innocent and that he thought that there was more to me. There was a hint of resignation in Emond's voice that almost made Joanna feel sorry for him. Almost. So he still wishes for people to see him as innocent, despite the obvious evidence against him. Why? Joanna demanded. I do not know, Emond replied. Because Walder Frey is a fool who has a huge wall on his shoulder about his house. He cannot accept that the nonsense he pulled before will not work now. Jaina said furiously. Janna, Emond began. It is true, Jenna interrupted. The old man still thinks this is the reign of Aegon the Fortunate, and he can get away with anything. He needs to realize that the Frey sit where they are because other houses have allowed them to get to that place. None more so than House Lannister. If he wishes to cause controversy, then he must suffer for it. The letter he sent you is proof that he has not learned his lesson. Joanna found that she completely agreed with Janna. But seeing the expression on Emond's face, she suspected that some truth that had been long buried was about to come bursting forth to the surface, and so she waited. Sure enough, Emond erupted. My father worked hard to ensure that the family remained strong after the mess my grandfather made of things. He has had to put up with people constantly looking down on him, despite the fact that he has worked harder than any of them. He is the bloody reason why the Riverlands didn't erupt into chaos during the regency of Hoster Tully, and now the crown has him watched like some sort of criminal. All he ever did was suggest that perhaps the crown might reconsider its stance on certain things. Nothing more. He does not deserve to be handled like a man who might erupt. It is not right, nor is it fair. Nor was it fair that Princess Axelora was raped by the rat, the hawk, and the pig, and that people using their regalia are not trying to cause something. Nor is it right that your father spends his days plotting and breeding like a rabbit instead of doing something about the chaos unfolding. But you would never admit to that, would you, Emond? Jaina replied. Joanna waited. She knew that more would be coming. She could see it in the way Emond's face tightened, how his hands gripped the chair tightly. My father does what needs to be done to keep order. He does more than any of the other lords, including Lord Tywin. He has always done more, so what if he is indulging in something that others might consider unsavory? He is doing it for himself, and nobody is getting hurt. The House of Charlton and John Root, both of who have been attacked and destroyed, thanks to your father's unsavory acts. Tell that to the noble girls who now have scars and will never be able to sleep again, thanks to your father. Tell that to the countless others who are now burning with nothing but rage and horror because of your father. James shot back. Joanna watched and waited. Emond's eyes had grown large. Very large. There was clear anger on his face. His breathing was heavy. Watch yourself, you absolute whore. Emond roared, and now there was surprise on Jen's face. Emond had never said this to her before then. That was interesting. You know nothing. You and your golden cage, you know nothing. Oh, so you were married off to me when you were a child, and you have to put up with being married to a Frey. Fucking well done. You have lived in the Rock your entire life. You have never had to deal with anything else but your own fucking whim. You have done nothing. You are nothing but what the name gave you. So, please, spare me your little outrages. You care nothing for the people, nothing at all. And now it suits you to care. You disgust me. Jenna looked as if she was about to reply, but before she could, Emond continued, his voice growing ever louder. You do not know anything about me. You never bothered. You just accepted your fate and contented yourself with spiting me. I have had enough of it. I have had enough of this entire family looking down on me. Emond stared at Jenna. Joanna saw the guards approaching. She held out a hand, and they waited. The time was not quite right. Emond kept staring at Jenna. His face was red. His eyes were wide. You want to know fear? His voice had gotten deeper now. You want to know fear, oh wife of mine? Then let me show you fear. Suddenly a knife appeared in Emin's hand, and Joanna saw a carving of a rat and a hawk crash together on the handle. Emin's hand moved down toward Jenna, and it was at that point that Joanna moved her hand, and the guards came in. Emin was tackled to the ground, the knife knocked out of his hand. As he struggled, Joanna looked on, her expression blank. When Emin had stopped struggling, she said, "Emin Fry. In the name of Tywin Lannister, Lord of Casterly Rock, Warden of West and Shield of Lannisport, I hereby arrest you and declare your income confiscated." She looked at the guards and said, "Throw him in the cell." As Emin was lifted up and dragged out, he started cackling. "You think this is over? It has just begun. We shall have our revenge. The game has begun, and the bell has tolled for you all." His cackling carried on down the hallway and out into the cells. Joanna looked at Jenny and took her good sister's hand. Her good sister looked stunned. "I never thought... I didn't think... How could you?" He was, and is adult, but his anger was always there, Joanna said soothingly. "I feel like such a fool. How could I not have seen this coming? How could I have not seen the signs? I am supposed to be able to read him. That is how I have kept him under check for so long." Jenna protested. "He knew how to keep his emotions hidden. He is Walder Frey's son, of course he did." Joanna said, "What does this mean?" Jenny asked. "It means we now know who the rat is, and we know how to carve him out from within," Joanna said. Her good sister nodded, but Joanna knew it would take a long time to recover from this. Not for the first time, she cursed her uncle Titus. The journey south was always a long one. Rickard was not sure what it was about leaving Winterfell, but for some reason it always seemed to go on and on. He had left roughly 3 weeks ago with a small escort, and it was only yesterday that he had arrived in Harrenhal, where the king and the court were staying. The last time he had come south to meet the king had been during the early days of King Aerys' reign, when the king had been a young man, when they had both been young men, filled with ambition and dreams. They had made promises to one another. And now Rickard had come south to meet and see whether the king was willing to remember the promises. The king was dressed in red and black, the colors of his house, with the elaborate crown of Aegon, the unworthy, atop his head. Rickard bowed low and said, "Your Majesty, I have come as requested to meet and greet, and to discuss things of great importance." He remained bowed, his head lowered, as the king replied, "Lord Rickard, my most loyal of servants, it has been too long since last we met. Welcome, and rise." Rickard raised himself up to his full height. The king extended his hand, and Rickard moved forward to kiss the ring on the king's right hand. Once that was done, he moved back and waited for the king to speak. It took a moment, but then the king said, "So, you have come from the frozen lands north of the Neck to meet your king. Tell me, how does the north do?" Rickard took a moment to think of the question. The north was developing, the silver mines were booming, the lumber trade with the islands was going very well, but there were a few things that were somewhat worrying him. He took a moment and then said, "The north stands tall and proud, strong to the touch and firm in the ground, as she has been for the past century, Your Majesty, and with your blessings she will continue to do so." He had things he wished to discuss with the king, but in front of so many people here, gathered in the Hall of 100 Hearths, he did not think it would be appropriate. As always, the king seemed to know what he was thinking, for he clapped his hands and said, "Everyone but Lord Tywin, Lord Rickard and Lord Hoster, leave the room, go and explore this great beast of a castle." There was a great shuffling of movement, and shortly the hall was emptied to just the 4 of them, and the king's guard who were there to guard the king. The king fixed his eyes on him and asked, "What is it that there is pressing you so? I know you would not have left Winterfell. Were the issues not most pressing, so speak?" Rickard took a moment to consider, and then said, "My king, I have had word from the men of the Neck. It appears that Walder Frey continues to meet with his bannermen, and with other knights of the Shire who continue to oppose your Majesty's command. They are growing in number, and they continue to discuss things that are most alarming." The king's eyes narrowed, but other than that, there was no visible sign of worry. "What sort of things do they discuss?" Rickard looked at Tywin Lannister and said simply, "Walder Frey was not happy whatsoever with the execution of his son Aemon, nor was he happy that Jaenso Lannister and her sons refused to move from the rock. My sources tell me that he feels this is a great slight to him and his house, and he feels it needs to be answered accordingly." One of the Cranogmen took something off of one of the riders he sent out. Rickard took the piece of paper out of his pocket and handed it to Sakurel, the Lord Commander, who handed it to the king. The king read it and laughed. "He plans on mustering an army and riding southwards." "How very interesting. Walder Frey has grown from being cautious to being bold and rash. He must truly fear what Aemon told your wife, Tywin. Lord Casterly nodded and said, I believe Walder Frey is not as in control of the situation as he would like to be. Joanna wrote to me that the dagger that Aemon Frey drew out had a rat and a hawk clashing on its handle, a symbol that was last seen some 20 years ago. The king had clearly heard this before, for he did not look alarmed, though Rickard felt his own heart speed up. Could it really be the rat, the hawk, and the pig back from the grave? The king clearly saw the question on his face, for he said, yes, we believe that the deadly trio are back for more. And we have reason to believe that Walder Frey is a member of that group. That did not surprise him. He had had dealings with Walder Frey before, and the man always came across as bitter and with something on his shoulder about the position of his house. Do you think he wishes to disrupt the natural order of things? Of the progress that has been made, Your Majesty? Rickard asked. That seemed like something that Walder Frey would do. Yes, was the king's simple reply. Lord Tywin elaborated. His Majesty and I feel that Walder Frey has been planning this for some time. When we looked through the accounts, we found several large payments into knightly purses that went unaccounted for in previous collections. We also found several donations to the Iron Bank of Bravos. All of this fits a pattern that Lord Sirrod had explained to us. The ravings of Lord Sirrod had spread far and wide. Rickard had heard them. Hells, even Umber had heard them. And Frey wants to bring down the natural order to ensure the continued growth of his own family. It made sense. The man had more children than he had sense. It would be expensive maintaining all of that. The king nodded. It would appear that this is what Frey wants. The man has more of a sex drive than he does common sense. There was a slight pause, and then the king said, but enough about Frey. What else is there that bothers you? Lord Stark. I know you would not have just come here for that. Rickard took a breath. I wish to speak to you about potential ventures in the north. He had done his reading and his research, and he knew there was a lot of potential within the land he ruled, and it was criminal that it had not been explored. The silver mines are doing very well. The growth from their extract has increased fivefold in this year alone. However, I think that there is greater potential within the north than we might previously have thought. He took another breath and then said, there is enough lumber within the north to help build 1,000 of the best ships that the royal fleet could have. There is enough meat within the north through the cattle and the sheep and the other animals that prowl our lands to ensure proper food supplies for a long time. We do not need to constantly rely on others to provide for us. The North has relied on others for too long. I think the time has come to change that. The king's eyes sparkled with the same sort of enthusiasm as Rickard had seen when he had talked about building a wall much bigger than the wall. And how would we ensure that these things were properly utilized? Forgive me, my lord, but I know what the northern lords are like. They will fight this with everything they have. How do we ensure that they remember who benefits the most from this? Rickard had thought long and hard about this, and when he replied, he felt confident in the answer he was giving. The Lords of the North are a stubborn people, that is true. However, they also realize that being the ones to produce the goods that they sometimes have to rely on others to produce is the most effective way to increase their standing in the world. I have met with several of the Lords of the North, Bolton, Restwell, Dustin, Manderley, and Glover, and they all agree that this is something that must be done. With your permission, sire, I would begin the process of starting the cattle farms and the land charters for the cutting of wood. The king looked intrigued. The glimmer was very much there. He looked at Lord Tywin, who spoke. An interesting proposal, but where would the farms and the land be for the cutting of this wood? Rickard clapped his hands, and his servants, who had remained behind as per the prior agreement, brought a table and placed a map of the north on it. Rickard stood before it and gestured. There is plenty of grazing land here on Sea Dragon Point and the Stony Shore. This land has been farmed for generations and is untapped. The cattle here produce some of the best meat that there is within the Seven Kingdoms. As for the wood itself, that would come from the Wolf's Wood, from the Sheep's Head Hills, and from the forest of the Grey Cliffs and Carhold, areas which are firmly protected by land and by barriers of other kinds. And how would you ensure that the resources are not taken by hoarders? We know that there are some within the north who do not like paying or giving anything to the south. Lord Tywin asked with razor-sharp precision. Rickard looked at the man and said, you are not the only one who could do a Rains of Castamere, should they wish it, my lord. Hand. It was true. When Umber had threatened something, Rickard had burned his fields and hanged 2 of his sons for the insult. Umbra had gotten the point. Lord Tysleen seemed to accept this answer. The king, however, had more questions. What of the King's Road? That is a road that has suffered some abuse in the past, and as such, Winterfell has been lax in doing its part in repairing it. Will you address this? Rickard did his best. Not the blush. It was true. The King's Road was horribly underdeveloped in the north, compared to what he had seen on his journey south, and that was something he had long been meaning to change. He nodded in agreement. I will be, your majesty. It is a crime that we have left it for so long. The king seemed pleased by this, and said, Very well, I will have Tywin here write up the letters of recommendation to allow you to do this without concern from others. You have the credit for these ventures, I trust. Rickard had ensured that there was enough money within their coffers, with the Iron Bank and Bravos still not on good terms with the crown. He had needed to. I do. Your Majesty, thank you for asking. The king clapped his hands. Then it is sorted. Now let us turn to another matter that I have been contemplating. The Blackwood-Bracken feud has settled down for now, but when I met with Lord Blackwood, he mentioned that he had written to you, and you refused to get involved. Why was that? Rickard had expected this question and had his answer prepared. I did not feel it was my place. Your Majesty, I am merely a servant of the crown, not the crown itself. It was not right for me. And get involved in a dispute that would bring with it cries of partiality in whatever way I decided. I know Lord Hoster sometimes has a hard time handling the matter fairly. Lord Hoster nodded in agreement. And do you think the peace will last? The king asked. Rickard thought about that for a moment and then said, I think that the peace will hold for as long as Blackwood and Bracken feel they have nothing to gain from fighting one another. The Rygers will be important in ensuring that nothing more happens with their control of the forest. The king hummed in agreement. Very well. Now there was one more thing I believe you wished to speak about. Here the king looked at both him and Hoster and said, Both of you. Hoster stepped forward so he was standing next to Rickard and he bowed low. Then, when the king gestured for him to rise, he did so. We've come to ask for your permission to betroth our children to one another. Your Majesty, Hoster said. And why should I agree to this? The king asked. The Riverlands can be a tinderbox and the north is a giant region. If I were a suspicious man, I might think you were plotting something against me. Rickard kept his face blank. They were plotting something, but not against the crown. He answered, The North and the Riverlands have always been loyal to the crown through House Stark and House Tully. We have served loyally and have ensured stability and order. Our children are of the same generation as His Royal Highness the Prince of Dragonstone. We believe that this marriage would tie our 2 realms closer together and ensure better cooperation should war ever broke out. Rickard saw the thoughtful expression crossing the king's face and knew he was thinking about the War of the Ninepenny Kings and how long it had taken to sort things out there. The king seemed intrigued by this and then asked, Then who of your children would be betrothed? My eldest son and heir Brandon, Rickard replied, and my eldest daughter Catelyn, Hoster stated. The king seemed thoughtful and looked at Tywin Lannister to get his views on things. I think it would be a good match, Your Majesty. The Starks and Tullys have always supported the crown and done their best to ensure their respective realms are held together in law and order. Having them bonded together would bring goodwill and ensure better unity throughout the realm. There was another pause, and for a moment, Rickard was worried that the king would say no, but then he said, Very well, I consent to the betrothal and the marriage. Thank you, Your Majesty, Rickard and Hoster said, going to kiss the king's ring. They stepped back and waited for the king to speak once more. Now that that is done, I suggest you both go and rest. Lord Stark, your son is in the common room, if you wish to speak with him, the king said. Rickard nodded and bowed before turning and leaving the hall. As he walked toward the common room, he thought about Eddard. He wondered what his son was actually like. He had not seen him in 4 years. He would be 13 name days old now, nearly a man grown. Would he be like Brandon, a little wild and unreserved, or would we be like Rickard himself? Rickard had many questions floating through his mind, but they all stopped when he saw his son sitting there, reading a book. He cleared his throat, and his son looked up. He saw Lydar's eyes looking back at him, shocked and surprised. Hello, Eddard, he said softly. His son stood up and walked toward him. Eddard stood before him, and then they hugged. Father, it is good to see you, his son said. They pulled back from one another, and Rickard took the time to look at his son. Eddard had grown taller, his brown hair was cut short, and there was the beginning of a wispy mustache as well on his upper lip. His eyes were warm, and he had broad shoulders. Rickard felt as if he was looking at his cousin Benjen all those years ago. He nodded to himself, and then asked his son, "How are you doing? Are you enjoying yourself?" "Yes, very much so, father, thank you. The journey here was very interesting, and there are a lot of books in the library, so I've been reading them," Eddard replied. Rickard smiled. At least that was one thing about his son that hadn't changed. Even as a young child, Eddard had loved to read. He got it from Loyara. Rickard was convinced of that. He took a moment to think about that, and then asked, "Have you found anything of interest during your stay here then?" Eddard nodded. "There's a book here about House Strong, the ruling house of Harrenhal during the Dance of Dragons. It goes into a lot of detail about their origins and about how they fought and struggled for supremacy over the Riverlands with the Tullys. It's really interesting, and I think there are some parallels to what's happening now." Rickard nodded. He knew, or rather suspected he knew, what his son was meaning, but right now he merely wanted to get to know his son a bit more. "How do you find Lord Tywin and his family? Are they kind to you?" It felt odd asking such questions, but he knew he needed to ask. He needed to give Laya something. "I like them very much. They are very kind, and Jamie reminds me a little of Benjen. He's got a lot of energy and stuff," Eddard said, trailing off. Then he asked softly, "How are Laya and Benjen?" Rickard smiled. "They are well. Lyanna continues to cause all kinds of trouble in Winterfell, and as such I am considering whether it would be wise to give her that sword she keeps asking for, or now. As for Benjen, well," Rickard trailed off. It was hard for him to talk about his youngest and not remember Lyanna lying in their bed, covered in blood. He blinked. Eddard did not need to know that. Benjen is doing well. That didn't sum it up, but it was enough. He noticed that Eddard had not asked about Brandon, and so he said, "Brandon is doing well as well." Eddard nodded and said nothing for a moment, and then asked, "Will you be coming to the Rock, father?" There was hope in his son's voice, and Rickard hated himself for the words he said next. "No, my business here is done. I must return to the north and to Winterfell." His son's shoulders fell, and his voice was shaky when he replied, "Okay." It was good to be home, Tywin thought as he waited for the king to enter the Hall of 100 Crowns, where the council meeting was to be held. They traveled through the Riverlands and had stopped off at various castles, including the monstrosity that was Harrenhal. And if he were being frank, Tywin really fitted Casterly Rock. It was home, and there was something about being home that just sort of soothed his nerves and his anxieties as they were. There had been something in Harrenhal, a particular mood that had struck him as odd. Lord Wayne was a good man, slightly older than Tywin was himself, but still a good man. And yet, Tywin had gotten the feeling that he was growing tired of everything. The oaths, the world, the pains. It was something most definitely worth looking into again, especially considering the cost of running such a castle as Harrenhal. They would need the Waynes in the time to come. That much Tywin was sure of. Tywin looked around the room at his fellow counselors. He was starting to grow quite annoyed with them. Lord Stonnon was capable, as was Lord Chelstead, but Valerian held his position simply because he was kin to the king, while Sar Jaxius was never firmly planted anywhere for him to make a valid assumption of the man. Pyxo was a stooge, a man who was only good for one or two things, nothing more. The door opened and the king walked in. They all stood and bowed. The king sat down and then they were seated. There was a brief pause and then the king spoke. "So, here we are, Casterly Rock again. For the first time in 9 years. I believe we've achieved something quite remarkable. The feeling we got from the travel around the Riverlands was that it was overdue and needed, especially as Frey continues to be a nuisance. Now, the questions we have to handle are of a more manageable measure. I believe we should start with the issue of Braavos." Tywin took the cue and spoke. Braavos continues to suffer through the burning fires of its isolation. It has seen stocks and shares in the Iron Bank fall by roughly 40% in the past 2 years, and the chiefs of the bank have been replaced 7 times in the past 3 months alone. As for the Sea Lord, his position has become untenable. He will either need to step down or stage a coup to take complete power. Right now, the candidates to replace him are a man who once worked for the Iron Bank and someone who served as an army captain. "So, we all know who will win that election then," Staunton jested. The king ignored Staunton and asked, "Would the army captain serve our purposes more, being as he is a martial man, and he might well be willing to be pushed toward attacking someone who will tie up Braavos' resources for the time being?" Tywin considered the query, and then said, "I believe that the army captain would be preferable for us, Your Majesty. He has fewer ties to the Iron Bank, and from what I have learned, does not share in their views either politically or economically. He would be far more willing and likely to strike out at Pentas or on Volantis to beggar the city than Westeros." Sir Jaxarus spoke up then as well. "I think that Lord Tywin is right. The army captain is someone who would be much more amenable to a little arm pulling, someone who would take the gold and look the other way whilst his city burned, if you will." The king seemed pleased by this, a grin spreading over his face. "Very well, then we shall provide what support we can to this army captain. I want reports on his progress regularly." There was a pause, then the king looked straight at Chelstead and asked, "And how progresses the foundations for the Royal Bank?" The Royal Bank was something that the king and Tywin had agreed upon some years ago, back when they were both still green as grass. The need for a foreign power to lend money to the Iron Throne was something that they had both found intolerable, and so the plans had begun, and now it seemed as though they were finally being implemented. It was something that Tywin was quite excited to see come to fruition. Chelstead smiled. "The Royal Bank has so far gotten 80 signatories to agree to putting up the first series of payments into it. They are all from the nobility, and a few of the developing merchant tradesmen have expressed interest in gaining loans from the bank. The buildings that the bank shall be housed in King's Landing have been secured and checked. They have fully agreed with the procedures Your Majesty highlighted before, and as such, all that is needed now is for the grand opening." "How many staff?" the king demanded. 150 at last count, Your Majesty," Chelstead said. "And how many are nobles and how many are from the lesser class?" the king asked. 90 are from the nobility and 60 are from the lesser class, sire. The ones from the lesser class have learned the tricks more easily, and thus are prepared to step in should the nobility falter," Chelstead said. Tywin had to hide a smirk behind his hand. The nobility not knowing the tricks of coin counting and extra plays did not surprise him. Some of the nobles could not even read or write. As such, it did not surprise him that they were slow to pick up the tricks. The king nodded. "I want that rate to increase. The nobles must know the procedures. I will not have the bank being cheated out of revenue because the nobles are too stupid." "Of course, Your Majesty," Chelstead said. Rosierlian spoke then. "Is it not better that they remain stupid? That way they cannot do something that would hinder the bank itself." The king stared at Villion, and Tywin interjected. "I would disagree with you, Lord Losieris. The nobles need to know what it is they are doing, so that they do it properly. We must maintain order and balance. Having the lesser class know more than the nobility, well, that is simply not right." Villion looked as if he wanted to spit at Tywin, but instead he merely nodded. The king seemed not to have noticed that, for instead he changed the conversation to something else. "Very well, the Royal Bank is sorted. I will leave that in your capable hands, Chagstead." A pause and then, "Now, there is something else I wish to discuss. First and foremost, the issue of the phrase." Another pause. The king inhaled and then exhaled. "Now Walder Frey is an old man, but he has some level of power. We know he is planning and plotting. His son Emmon was kind enough to tell us that before his death." Here the king grinned, and Tywin remembered the image of the king laughing. King Frey shot himself before being executed. He pushed the image away and focused on what the king was saying. "Personally, we wish to remove the phrase from the face of this kingdom. However, because Walder Frey has so many children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, that would be difficult. Therefore, I am willing to listen to suggestions as to what to do with them." Sir Jack spoke first. "I would force Walder Frey's hand, or I would have his firstborn son, Stepharon, killed. Stepharon is the thing keeping that house together. Underneath his father's faltering gaze, remove Stepharon and the entire house will implode on itself, as I do not think Walder Frey has the desire to keep things together anymore. How does one remove the heir to the twins, considering that heir has not moved from the crossing?" The lion asked, scorn in his tone. "One gives him a reason to leave," Sir Jackasert said. "We must make it seem as though he must leave, otherwise he will be stuck when his father falls. Sir Stepharon is not like his father. He has a sense of duty to the crown and to his people. And sure, he remembers that, and he will leave the twins just as fast as he can. And that is when we take advantage of the rivalry between the branches of the family, using Walder Rivers to spring the trap." Chelstead said, then getting to where Tywin had gotten to long before them. "It is an interesting plan. We know Rivers has done what has been asked of him before, and therefore it could well ensure that we have some sort of peace. That would be true if Sir Stefan was like his father, or even like the rest of his family, Tywin said. He is far more cautious than any of his siblings and his father. He will sense a plot from miles out if it comes to be there. Better to have Walder Frey die than to risk alerting him to something else. We already know that the man's health is failing. There is no reason why we cannot play on that fact. There was a lengthy pause as they all considered what he'd said. Tywin kept his attention on the king. The king was the only one who mattered in this frame of discussion. What he said could make or break anyone in this very room. At this very moment, eventually after some thought, the king replied, I agree with Tywin. Jack Reese, I want our men within the Twins to take care of Walder Frey. And then I want to ensure that the house destroys itself as quickly as possible. Sarah Jack Reese nodded and made a note of this. There was another brief pause. Then the king continued. Now, as to the Iron Islands, what word has there been from Quelyn Greyjoy? Tywin had to repress the anger that he felt at the man's name. He remembered quite well how Quelyn Greyjoy had humiliated his father during the raids and the pillaging and everything else. He had sworn that one day he would bring down Quelyn Greyjoy, and he would have done so sooner had it not been for the fact that Balon Greyjoy was much worse. He listened intently as Pycelle spoke. He writes that, as of yet, none of his men have returned from the west, but he is convinced that there is most definitely something there worth exploring. Yes, Greyjoy's desire to explore what was to the west of the known world and bring everything more squarely back to the Ironborn, away from fighting and raiding. There were times when Tywin hoped that the man would be successful, for then he could exploit the potential riches and make the rock and the crown far richer, and then there were times when he wished the man would fail, so that he could gain some revenge for the insults dealt to his father. Right now, he wasn't sure which side was winning out. The king's face showed his interest. And how does he know that there is something worth exploring if his men have not returned? Pycelle looked down at the paper before him, and he said, he believes that there is something there. He has a good feeling about this, and he thinks just a little more time will show that he was right. There was a brief pause, and then Valerian said, well, perhaps Quelyn Greyjoy has gone mad then. He is quite old, and with the sons he has, one cannot blame the old man. What has Quallen said about his sons? Tywin asked. They were trouble, and Tywin was quite concerned about what would happen when Quallen did in fact die. Velon continues to raid the Summer Isles. Euron remains under arrest in Pike, and the others are growing, Pycelle said. The king grunted. Let them rot, so long as they do not cause more trouble. That is all that matters. There was a general hum of agreement, and then the king said, now, there is nothing more to discuss. This meeting is at an end. Tywin, if you would remain behind. The other council members got up and bowed before the king before walking out of the room. After the last member of the council had left, and it was just the two of them, three if you included Sergerold, a silence fell over the hall. It continued for a time, but Tywin was content to allow it to settle. Eventually, the king spoke. There are a great many betrothals being arranged as of late. Many of the new generation are growing up and coming together. There was something like wistfulness in the king's voice, and Tywin remembered that Prince Rhaegar was now a man grown at 7 and 10. Soon he would need to be married, perhaps. I remember when I got married. It was a strange event. There were many things I had still to learn, and perhaps the mistakes I made could have been avoided if I'd had the chance to learn. But that is neither here nor there. Personally, Tywin thought that the king would have made the mistakes he'd made with Rhaegar, even if they'd been betrothed from birth. Now, what do you make of the betrothal between Brandon Stark and Catelyn Tully? From the way the question was phrased, Tywin knew that the king wasn't asking for a political explanation, but a personal one. I think it is a good marriage, and it is good to see Rickard moving from the north and giving a more southern focus. I am somewhat disappointed that I could not get the girl for Jaime, but that is the way of things. The king snorted. Ever the ambitious one, aren't you, Tywin? Now with Eomer Martell married to Baelor Hightower, perhaps the Hightowers finally stop their nonsense and move into getting involved into the world again. Personally, Tywin thought it was better if the Hightowers remained out of action, but the king seemed to have this deep-rooted desire for their involvement, and he was not quite sure he understood it. I still do not understand why Doran Martell married that woman from Norvos. What was wrong with marrying Mariah? Tywin was not sure how to respond to that. Mariah Dane was the king's cousin, and as such, someone he had been very close to growing up. There had been talk of a betrothal before, And then Doran Martell had married for love and it had not materialized. That was still a sore spot, especially as Mariah had died shortly afterwards. There was another silence then, and then King said, "I've received word from Stefan. It seems that Jon Arryn wants to arrange a marriage between his son Robert and Arryn's niece Alice. I've told Stefan to consider it very carefully." "You believe then that Arryn cannot be trusted properly, Your Majesty?" Tywin asked. "Most definitely not. You remember the role he played in Maegor's uprising all those years ago? Oh, I am sure he will still deny it, but the evidence is there, and we've done the digging. He played a big role in getting my cousin killed, and so I shall never trust him." The king stated simply. Tywin felt there was something more to Jon Arryn, but he didn't have confirmation of that, and so he allowed it to settle. "I agree with you, Your Majesty, but knowing Stefan, what is there to prevent Arryn from strong-arming him into agreeing to the betrothal, like he did fostering Robert there?" That was still something Tywin had never forgiven Arryn for, taking advantage of Stefan when he was grieving. The king waved a hand. "Stefan is not a grieving 14-year-old boy anymore. He is a grown man, with sons and a family, a highly respected lord of the realm. Should Arryn even think of forcing him to do anything, Stefan could very well remind him that he is also a member of the blood." Tywin doubted that Stefan would do that last bit. He seemed oddly against reminding people that he was officially a member of the royal family and had been since birth. Still, he nodded in agreement with the king and said, "I am sure Stefan will stand his ground, as you say, Your Majesty." He thought about what he next wanted to say and then decided to say what had been itching at the back of his mind for some time. "Your Majesty, about His Royal Highness Prince Rhaegar, have you given any thought to who he shall be marrying?" It was blunter than he would have liked, and he winced slightly at that, but the king laughed. "Yes, I have." Tywin felt a momentary flicker of hope, before he suppressed that vigorously. "I've decided to maintain long-standing tradition. My son shall marry his sister Shaena and therefore secure the line properly," the king stated firmly. Tywin felt a brief flicker of anger and annoyance. This incest would destroy the royal family, he was sure of it. But then he pressed that feeling down and said, "Of course, Your Majesty, a wise choice." The king smiled. "Of course. I have not forgotten the good service you have provided me over the years, as well as your friendship. Therefore, I am going to present this offer to you, and I know you will accept it." Tywin leaned forward, then intrigued. "I will betroth my daughter Daenerys to your son Jaime, and our two houses will be tied together in marriage, as they always should have been." Tywin felt a tinge of surprise course through him. He should have thought of this, but he'd been so wrapped up in having his daughter as the future queen, he'd never thought of this at all. He cheekily schooled his face and said, "This is an honor, Your Majesty. Thank you. I most graciously accept." The king stood up then and walked over to him and clasped his hand. "Good. We will be brothers in name and deed now." Tywin nodded, smiling. Having the royal family present in Casterly Rock was an experience that Cersei thought she'd never get over. She'd met them once before, when she'd been very young, and that had been in King's Landing. She'd been impressed with the splendor of the capital, but hadn't thought it anything compared to the Rock. How naive she had been. The prince was as handsome as she remembered, more so, and Princess Shaena was even more beautiful than she had been all those years ago. Cersei wasn't sure she was jealous of the princess. She was a Targaryen after all. It was only right that she marries her brother the prince. No, Cersei was beginning to think she was more jealous of the prince for getting to spend so much time with the princess. She wasn't sure why she felt like that, only that she did. It was something to consider for later. Right now, though, she was with her mother. And so she asked, "Mama, if Prince Rhaegar is marrying Princess Shaena and Jaime is marrying Princess Daenerys, who will I marry?" Cersei was thankful that Mama was not like any of the other ladies she had met. The other ladies would have made some silly noise about that and then fussed about her and ignored her question. Mama merely considered the question for a moment before responding. "Someone kind and smart and brave. Someone worthy of you, sweetling." "Does that mean I will have to wait a long time before I can be betrothed?" Cersei asked. And as she did so, she found that she did not really mind. "I think so." "Yes, does that bother you?" Mama asked. Cersei shook her head. "No, I'm glad. It means I get more time to think about what I want to learn before it does actually happen." That was important to her. Jaime was so very excited to be marrying Princess Daenerys, but he had not thought about the things he would need to know before he could marry her. Cersei knew that, as a boy, Jaime could get away with that. But Cersei, as a girl, could not. She would need to know almost everything there was to know before she could get married. No husband would want a wife who was stupid, after all. Mama nodded approvingly. And what things do you still wish to know? You know about how to keep track of things in the accounts. You are better than even your Uncle Damon at managing the flow of money. Cersei beamed with pride at that. It had taken her a long time to figure that out. So, what more is there that you wish to know? Cersei thought about the question for a moment and then said, I would like to learn how to ride properly. Not just side saddle, but to actually ride. I cannot be a good wife if I cannot go out hunting with him and ensure that he gets the right food for us to have for dinner. That was important. Though she made sure to grin to make sure Mama knew that she was at least partially joking. Mama grinned. Well, I suppose that can be arranged. There will be plenty of opportunities for you to be able to learn how to ride once the royal party has gone. There was a pause and then Mama asked, How are you finding it? Having the royal family here, is it as good as you hoped it would be? Cersei nodded enthusiastically. It is really good, Mama. Really good. I feel that there are more things to talk about with Princess Shaena and Princess Daenerys than there are some of the noble girls that come through the rock. Certainly, more than there was to talk about with Mal Heatherspoon and Jane Farman, but she did not say that out loud. We talked about Princess Daenerys and the princesses in the tower the other day. That had been a very interesting conversation. Princess Shaena had found Princess Daena's conduct unbecoming, whilst Princess Daenerys had thought that Princess Daena should have simply killed her brother and been done with it. And what conclusions did you reach after speaking with the princesses? Mama asked. That there's more than one view over just what happened with the princesses in the tower. That because none of them left any actual accounts, and the fact that Princess Daenerys did not really speak much about anything, we can never really know for sure just what happened, Cersei said, and then added, So, in contrast to what Maester Craylan says, Mama laughed. Of course. Maester Craylan is but one man, sweetling. He is going to teach you what he knows and present you opportunities to question him. You must do so if you think it would be beneficial to do so. Cersei nodded. Yes, Mama. She glanced at the window outside and then asked, Might I go, Mama? I'm going to meet with Princess Shaena and Princess Daenerys, and we're going to go wandering through the castle. Mama nodded and smiled. Of course. Have fun, sweetling, and be safe. Cersei smiled and stood up and kissed her mama's cheek before turning and walking out of the room. She walked through the corridors, past courtiers who gave her a glance and nothing more, past men who were doing things with women that she knew would have their parts removed if Papa or Mama saw them. She stopped when she got to the princesses' rooms and knocked once and then twice. The door opened and Princess Shaena stood there, dressed in red and black, her hair done in a nice braid. Are you ready, Princess? Cersei asked, trying to fight down the swooping sensation she felt. The princess smiled. Yes, of course. She turned back and said, Dany, come on. Let's go. Princess Daenerys appeared then, dressed in silver and violet, and smiled at her. Cersei smiled in return, and then they walked out of the room. Cersei's of the King's Guard and 10 other guards accompanying them. They walked down the steps, and then out the door into the stone garden. Princess Daenerys spoke, then her voice filled with question. How old is the stone garden? Around 6,000 years old, Cersei said. She knew because Ned had told her, I think that it was here before the castle. Wow, Princess Daenerys said. Is it a natural creation or a man-made one? Cersei did not know that, and she knew Ned did not know that, so really she was somewhat floating empty here. She decided to answer with what she thought would be the right answer. I think it was a bird creation. Most of what we see here is a natural creation. Only the odd thing is man-made, and that's because either the Casterlys or the Lannisters wanted to make more of a statement. Princess Daenerys looked around the garden again and exhaled. That's really, really something. There was a brief pause, and then she turned to Princess Shaena and asked, Do you think we'll be here for another moon? Cersei felt her heart flip then. She really hoped so. She wanted to get to know her future good sir and the future queen a bit better. Why should Jaime get to have all the fun after all? Princess Shaena was slow to respond, her words considered. I think we might be getting that chance. I heard from a page that there's supposed to be another tourney happening. Really? Cersei and Princess Daenerys exclaimed. She'd not heard about that. I think so, yes. From what I was told, the first tourney was to celebrate the king in his hand and welcome us to the Rock. This tourney will be held to celebrate our two families and the union that symbolizes our strength. the princess said. Cersei looked at Princess Daenerys and smiled at the princess, who smiled back. Then she looked at the Princess Shaena and saw an odd expression on her face. Quietly, she asked, "You do not think there will be another tourney?" Princess Shaena was hesitant for a moment, and then she sighed. "I do not know. I was told that there would be people from all over Westeros coming to attend the tourney. And whilst I know that the rock is big enough to host most, I am not sure there is enough food supply to make it worthwhile, nor am I entirely sure that the person who told me this can be relied on to be truthful. After all, if there was going to be another tourney, the king would have said something, or Lord Tywin would have." Cersei thought about that and then nodded. It made sense, after all. Princess Daenerys spoke then. "Who was it who told you about this?" "Garrett?" Princess Shaena replied, a slight blush on her cheeks. Princess Daenerys squealed, then Garrett another squeal, and then, "Surely you know he can't be trusted for anything. Especially when it comes to you, Shae." Princess Shaena blushed again, and Cersei found her curiosity piqued. Quietly, she asked, "Who is Garrett?" "Garrett Peake. He's a page in the royal household. He comes from a minor branch of the House of Peake, and really he thinks he's something more than what he is. And that comes from the fact that I smiled at him once and said thank you for something. Now he spends most of his time trying to impress me with things that are usually lies," Princess Shaena replied. There was a blush spreading over the princess's cheeks, and Cersei found herself asking, "If that's the case, why do you believe him here, when he said there might be another tourney?" The princess sighed. "I don't know. I guess I thought that things might have changed. Rigor had spoken to him, and he said that Garrett had changed. And I don't know. It was silly of me." There was a brief pause, and then Cersei spoke again. "I've heard most of the House of Peake can't really be trusted anyway. Something about them all being liars." Princess Shaena laughed. "That's true." Another pause, and then she said, "Now, Cersei, I've heard that there is some sort of fortune teller in Lannisport. Do you wish to visit them?" Cersei had heard about this fortune teller, some lady from Essos, who had plied her trade throughout the Seven Kingdoms. She had made her home in Lannisport some 5 years ago. Mama had always told Cersei not to go and visit her or believe whatever nonsense she heard from such people. But Cersei also knew it would be a crime to refuse the princess, and so she nodded and said, "Of course, princess. Shall I let the guards know?" The princess shook her head and said, No need to. Ser Giles here will tell them." The White Knight of the Kingsguard nodded and walked off. A few moments later, they walked out of the stone gardens and into the corridor proper, as they made their way to the tunnels where the horses would be waiting. Ser Giles found them. Alongside him were several gold cloaks and several red cloaks, and Cersei could have groaned with anger then, Jane Farman and Melara Heatherspoon as well. Cersei nodded to them and then took the lift down to the tunnels, where she then mounted a horse and began the quick journey out of the tunnel, down the slope and into the city. They dismounted outside the Seven Gate, left their horses with Sir Stafford, her mama's brother, and then walked into the city. Lannisport was bustling with activity. There were merchants calling out for the sale of their wares. There were women calling out for the sale of sweets and fruit and drinks. There were children running through the street, playing games and doing all kinds of other things. Cersei walked with confidence through the streets, ignoring the whispers and the looks. She knew roughly where the witch's shop was. She'd heard about it and turned right down Slater's Alley and then left into Guild Corner, and there it was, the shop. It was more of a shack than anything else. She stood before it and asked the princess, "Do you wish to go in?" "Yes," the princess said, and so they walked into the shop, the door clinging with bells as they did so. An old woman appeared then, her skin brown and fading, her hair tangled in webs of silver and black, and her eyes were slumped and big. "Well, what do you want?" Cersei shared a look of disbelief with the princess. Could this old hag really be a fortune teller? She moved forward, and the old woman's head snapped forward to look at her. "We wanted to know whether you are really a fortune teller, or just a fraud." The woman straightened then as if insulted. "I am Maggie the Magi. I have come from a line of seers that spans back long before the first men lived in Westeros. So, if you wish to know the future, then you are in the right place." There was a long pause, and then the woman looked at Cersei and said, "You are filled with love and hate. You resent your brother and you idolize your father and mother. You want to be more than you can ever be. It will eat you inside and spit you out." "I do not understand," Cersei answered honestly. The woman, Maggie, snorted. "Of course not. You are a child. But remember this, Cersei, you are a woman who will have many things go right for her. But before they do, they will go wrong and you will want to die. Cersei felt as if she'd been hit in the stomach. How do you know my name? The woman snorted again. I know all of your names, Princess Shaina. Come to hear whether there is truth in the prophecy. Cersei saw the princess move slightly, uncomfortable. I will tell you this. There will be children and there will be war. The rat might be tamed, but the hawk and the pig are still at large, and they will continue to wreak havoc until the Brotherhood is ready to emerge from the shadows. And you, Princess Shaina, will play the largest role possible. What nonsense is this? What are you talking about? The rat, the hawk, and the pig are nothing more than a fairy tale, Princess Shaina said. A story told to ensure that nobody got too many ideas. They were destroyed long ago. The woman laughed, or cackled. She was not sure which was the more appropriate word to use. Child, you think that is the case. You are not as silly as that to believe such a lie. They haunt the waking fabric of the Targaryen dynasty, as they have done since they first came to be with the Vulture King. And they will continue to haunt the dynasty until it is said and done, and the ground is littered with bodies. Princess Shaina sighed. I knew this would be a mistake. Come, Dame Cersei, let us go. The princess turned and left the store, the door clanging as she walked out. Cersei followed shortly after. After seeing the woman looking at her with something akin to manic laughter in her face, that worried her. As they walked back through the streets, the princess spoke again. I knew I shouldn't have come. Mother was right. These people do not know what they're talking about. Why did you want to go and see her, princess? Cersei asked. She was still a little unsure of herself and what the woman had meant by the things she'd said. Something was playing in the back of her mind, a memory of something, and she had to remember where it came from, for she did not think it was genuine. I do not know, the princess sighed. I thought it might be an interesting experience, but I was wrong. Never mind. There will always be other times to discuss things of importance. Cersei nodded, and they were silent again. Princess Shaina looked as if there were countless things on her mind, and Princess Daenerys' face was unreadable. Cersei found herself struggling with the words that the woman had said. The way she had said them made her think that the woman truly believed them, but she was not sure why she would. It had been foolish to go there, that much was for sure. Foolish and not right, and Mama would be disappointed in her for going, for entertaining such foolishness. She sighed and got on her horse, said goodbye to Sir Stafford, and then kicked her horse onward, biting her tongue against how uncomfortable it was. As they rode, Princess Daenerys spoke. What did she mean when she said that the hawk and the pig were related to the Vulture King? I thought the Vulture King was just some mad Dornishman the first time, and the second time, definitely not worth mentioning again. The rat, the hawk, and the pig were threats that harmed the royal family directly. She seemed mad. Did you see her eyes? Cersei pointed out. I think she was speaking nonsense. She certainly hoped so. The alternative was not something she wanted to think about. Yes, she was definitely mad. The rat, the hawk, and the pig were things that hurt our great-grandfather and his grandfather, not anybody else. They've been dead for decades. They aren't relevant anymore. I think she was a madwoman. Princess Shaina agreed. Will you tell the king, Shaina? Princess Daenerys asked. Cersei looked at the princess, and she realized then that the words the woman had said had been borderline treasonous, and therefore, as good subjects, they would have tell the king. But then they would need to admit to going to her, and that would cause all kinds of other issues. She was very impressed when the princess said, I will tell him a version of what happened, and you shall all agree with me, should he ask. Of course, princess, Cersei said at once. To question the decision would be wrong. Still, the woman's words echoed in her head as they got off their horses and took the lift back to the rock proper.
Thank you for listening to the story. If you enjoyed this reimagined story and audiobook style presentation, feel free to like and subscribe for more content like this. New stories and alternate scenarios are updated regularly. Now see you in the next video.